Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. The subject of today's video, I have decided, is going to be Tottenham Hotspur and their potential chances, from my perspective at least, of getting into the top 4 or top 5 as it is this season with the Champions League qualification places under Postecoglou. Now this is quite I wouldn't say controversial topic, but it's certainly one which divides opinion and sparks debate because obviously, Tottenham have been synonymous with Harry Kane for as long as many people can remember. He has been their lightning rod, their on-pitch leader, their main source of attacking thrust, and he has gone to Bayern Munich, and with that there is a sense of grieving and frustration from the Spurs fan base. But I think, and this is not necessarily an opinion that is backed up by fact, it's more of a gut feeling, but I do genuinely believe that there is a chance that Tottenham Hotspur, not necessarily in the long run, could be better without Harry Kane, because of course whenever you've got an elite goalscorer like him in your ranks, you are going to be in a very good place, at least from a goal scoring perspective. But I do think that the collective entity that is Tottenham Hotspur's first team squad may actually perform above the wider expectations for them this season, and there are a multitude of reasons why I believe that to be the case, or potentially the case. The first and probably most important in all of this is Postecoglou. I suppose you could say, come in for a little bit of stick on social media over the last couple of months because I have been very much a vocal fan of Postecoglou. I felt as though his time at Celtic was fantastic. I think, he really put his stamp on that Celtic side. And I've spoken at length on different podcast episodes over the last few months about my admiration for him. I personally felt that his CV, whether you look towards his work in Japan, whether you look towards his work in Australia with Brisbane, or indeed at Celtic, was fantastic. And immediately, as soon as he was linked with the Spurs job, let alone when he got it, there were so many people that immediately scoffed at the prospect of Postecoglou being a success at Spurs, because as far as they were concerned, he hadn't proven himself in what you would consider to be an elite league, whether it is Serie A, the Bundesliga, Ligue 1, you can go on and on. The Celtic scenario is one which I think, particularly from an English fan's perspective generally, this isn't my view, but it's a view that's held by many people. Celtic are expected to win the league year after year. We have seen, obviously, Rangers go up and down the divisions in Scotland in recent seasons. Yes, they have won a title in relatively recent memory, but it's been Celtic's league to lose for the most part. And with that in mind, Ange Postecoglou was a manager that was expected to deliver titles and cups year on year. And I think it's very easy to have a sort of tunnel vision view of him and his successes north of the border because of Celtic's dominance in the Scottish game. But whenever I heard Ange Postecoglou speak to the press regarding his team or whatever was going on in the sport at that particular moment, I was always very much impressed by his whole way of being. I think the way that he carries himself is not necessarily a stereotypical modern manager. He seems to be very grounded, very normal, unaffected by the glitz and glamour of the modern game. And I think he and Spurs have sort of come together at this perfect time for both of them. Because if you look at Spurs' most recent managerial appointments post Mauricio Pochettino, you had Jose Mourinho go in there, followed by Antonio Conte, two, in air quotes, win now managers. But in both cases, I always felt, at least this is my perspective as an outsider, that they didn't look down on Spurs, but I think there was this sense that Spurs fans and the hierarchy in general should almost be grateful to have them there because of what they've won and achieved in the game. They are two very big characters. We all knew that prior to them taking the Spurs job. And whilst I don't necessarily think that that Ange Postecoglou is happy to be there or grateful to be there, I think he has earned his role as Tottenham boss over a very long period of time amongst different jobs, and he deserves this chance. I think there is a real coming of age for his managerial CV at this point, and it's an opportunity that he's grafted for and one that he has deserved and one that he is determined to take with both hands. And if you look at his time at Celtic, and this comes back to my general perspective on their place within the game generally and what is expected of them. Yes, they are expected to win titles year on year, but there is a certain expectation about the way that Celtic play that you have to live up to. You know, it's not just enough to win a title for Celtic. You have to do it with a certain style, a certain area of dominance, and Ange Postecoglou was able to deliver that. And, you know, I think when he first arrived at Celtic, there were probably as many Celtic fans as there were Spurs fans when he arrived at Spurs who were sceptical because of his CV. But by the time he left Celtic, he had the entire fan base eating out of the palm of his hand. And I don't believe, and this is just my perspective as an outsider looking in, that he did so through platitudes or easily reached for words. I think he was very authentic in the way that he went about it. I think they understood his tactical ideology was one which was rock solid. And I do genuinely believe, similar to the Mauricio Pochettino era at Spurs, that he is going to be a manager that the entire fan base can get behind. And whilst, of course, we are only 2 weeks into the Premier League season, they've got a draw at Brentford in the first game and a victory over Manchester United in the second. 4 points from 6 is obviously very respectable, and I don't think many people would have had them down for 4 points before a ball was kicked in this campaign. But for me, and this is why really I am recording this video today, because I want to give a little bit more meat on the bone and a little bit more nuance to my suggestion on social media yesterday that I believe Spurs have a genuine chance of getting in the top 4 or 5 and qualifying for the Champions League this season. If I look at what Ange Postecoglou brought to Celtic across his time at Celtic Park, if I look at the pre-season campaign they've had, if I look at the way that he has handled Harry Kane's departure, he hasn't grumbled, he hasn't moaned, he hasn't used it as an excuse to sort of dampen expectations. He wants Tottenham to play a certain way. He has set his stall out and he is very laser focused on that from my perspective. Players like James Maddison have come in. I think he is going to be a fantastic asset for him in terms of his dead ball delivery, his quality in the final third. You've still got Son, you've still got Kulusevski, you've got a number of young players that can come in, be moulded and be given that confidence and platform by Ange Postecoglou to really reach another level, because it goes back largely to my perspective on his perception of the job itself. I think he probably, as a guy that grew up in Australia, that toiled away in different leagues that are not fashionable when it comes to the European game, he will really feel like this is a moment for him to grasp the opportunity of. And that in itself can be a heady mix. You know, I don't necessarily think that they are going to be a team that fire on all cylinders throughout the season. I don't think they are going to score goals as freely as they did when Harry Kane was in the side, but that stands to reason. I do believe that with no European football to worry about logistically or in terms of squad fatigue, that they can be very much tunnel visioned when it comes to their domestic campaign. And with the different projects that you have going on at the top of the English game at the moment, I do believe there is a genuine chance they could sneak in there in 4th or 5th. You know, Manchester United are a team that will always be put in the conversation for a Champions League qualification place. If you look at their first 2 performances, not only have they struggled to get past Wolves and lost to Spurs, it just looks very flat, disjointed and without an overall ethos. You know, Mason Mount has gone in there, he is flattered to deceive. I think they are going to have certain teething problems with Onana in goal, and whether or not that style of play works out in the immediate, I expect it to get, you know, ticking sooner rather than later, but I don't think they are a guaranteed lock for the top 4. We have seen Chelsea pick up 1 point from the first 6 available. There are all sorts of new players going in at Stamford Bridge, and once again I would expect Chelsea to work out the kinks and get there or thereabouts in the fullness of time. But if they aren't able to hit the ground running, Spurs could well be safely placed in that top 4 by January, February time, and at that point, with no European football to worry about, the tidal wave of positive momentum that will have built around Ange Postecoglou in relation to that Spurs fan base and the buy-in from the players could well be a heady mix that sees them go all the way. And I mean, it isn't, I don't think, a particularly outlandish position to make. You know, obviously Manchester City are going to be there to be shot at. I would expect them to win the Premier League by at least 4 or 5 points, if not more. I think Arsenal have pretty much got a squad that you can guarantee are going to be top 4 or 5. But I do think there are genuine question marks about every other side in that conversation. Even Newcastle, who was so fantastic under Eddie Howe last year and secured Champions League football, they've got European football to contend with this season. The flights back and forward, the squad fatigue, the rotation, we don't know how that is going to work. And I do genuinely believe that even though Harry Kane is gone, Spurs as a collective entity will almost know that they have to work 5 or 10% harder as individuals to make sure that they make up for the loss of such an elite goalscorer. Now, I don't necessarily suggest that Richarlison is the man to bang in 30 goals across a campaign. I don't think they are going to be able to work out every single necessary kink across this first season, but I do think there is a live chance that if they can keep their squad mainly fit, that Ange Postecoglou's tactical style could work wonders for them. You know, he has very broad shoulders. He is someone that is used to managing a club in Celtic that have high expectations for him. And mainly, I think he wants to be accountable to their fan base. He won't... And this isn't really a direct criticism of Antonio Conte, it's just a useful contrast to make as far as I'm concerned. If you look at the comments that Antonio Conte made in that infamous press conference where he pretty much said that the squad and the mentality of the football club was one that wasn't an elite winners group, I don't think you're ever going to hear anything like that from Ange Postecoglou. He will build something of a siege mentality, but he will do so playing a style of football that ultimately Spurs fans can fully get behind. And that is quite a key factor in this, because you've got Antonio Conte and Jose Mourinho, two managers that have been there, seen it and done it at the very top of the game. But if you speak to any Spurs fan, the football across that entire spell was turgid to watch. They didn't enjoy it. They didn't enjoy going to home games. It didn't feel free-flowing. And I think if you look throughout Ange Postecoglou's managerial career to date, although he has had success wherever he has been pretty much, and he has won many admirers and friends at every single club and job that he's had domestically and internationally, he hasn't always started like a train. And yet you look at Spurs at the moment, they have had a very successful opening 2 games. They were pretty settled in pre-season, and I think once it really starts to click, once they have got confidence, if they can, as I mentioned earlier in the video, get to 3rd or 4th by Christmas, then I do honestly believe that the run into the campaign without any European football to worry about could see them finish very strongly. And of course, if they do manage to do that with the size of fan base they've got, with the stadium they've now built, I do think that you can attract more players to it. I still think even without Harry Kane, they are a very attractive proposition for any top player that wants to take their game to another level. And personally, you know, I'm a Palace fan obviously, but I do feel genuinely invested in the Ange Postecoglou story, because I think he is something of an outlier in terms of the modern manager. He doesn't strike me as someone that will use buzzwords or look for a cryptic answer. He seems very direct and to the point, and that may well rub certain managers and reporters up the wrong way across the course of a full Premier League season. But right now, I genuinely feel like there is a chance, for a number of reasons, which hopefully I've explained relatively fully in this video, that they can actually make a genuine push for the top 4. And if they do manage to do that without a Harry Kane, then who knows where he can take them in years to come. You know, I'm not suggesting they will be able to break the dominance of a team like Manchester City, but we all know the financial muscle of Spurs now, and maybe this new project can, you know, provoke the ownership into spending a little bit more and feeling a little bit more engaged with the fan base in terms of the style of football they're playing and getting everyone singing from the same hymn sheet. Because if you look at the overall picture at Spurs, they've had issues with Daniel Levy, they've had issues with Enoch, they've had issues with Antonio Conte, Jose Mourinho, the style of play, the lack of direction. Whereas you've got a manager now in Ange Postecoglou that seems able, at least in the immediate, to sort of glue everyone together and take himself as the sort of standard bearer for it all. And maybe, you know, this is just me getting a little bit carried away early on, but I do genuinely believe that Tottenham Hotspur and Ange Postecoglou have come together at the perfect time for both of those entities, and it may well work perfectly for them, both in a short and long-term setting. That pretty much brings to an end what I wanted to say today. I appreciate, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, there will be plenty of people that feel as though I'm banging the Spurs drum a little bit too loudly for a Palace fan, but I honestly believe they are an interesting topic to cover. And when you've got so many different projects at different points across the top 6 or 7 of the Premier League, they feel to me like they could fly under the radar somewhat and get into that top 4 or 5 by May if they do, as I say, keep their squad fully fit across the 38 game campaign. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider giving it a like, pushing the subscribe button. It would really help me to grow this channel, as I'm trying to do as organically as possible each day. And other than that, I'll look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.